In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Warrior of Waves build. This build can be used from about the middle of the game onward in and through NG+. Gameplay here is from NG+, and in this build, we're focusing on the use of the Ruins Greatsword. Now, this is a weapon people have been asking me to make a build with for a very long time, and it's an absolutely outstanding weapon. And the Ruins Greatsword is actually a colossal sword weighing 23. It's a very heavy weapon, despite having Greatsword in its name. And it's a weapon that's absolutely devastating, and you get it at Redmane Castle, so it's not that far into the game, but it's also not at the very beginning of the game. Realistically, you're going to have to be a decent level, like 70 plus probably, in order to get this weapon for most players. So that's why I say you can use it through the majority of a playthrough, but you're not going to be able to use it all game unless someone drops it for you from the very beginning. And even then, the weapon has tremendous strength requirements, so you'd have to have a decent amount of strength in order to be able to two-hand it. And what I really love about this weapon is that it is a fantastic strength scaling weapon. It has S and strength scaling. It has insane attack power when fully upgraded. Most of the damage is physical, with about 15% of it or so being magic, which isn't too bad in my opinion. I mean, that means like if you use things like Exalted Flesh, or if you used Flame Grant Me Strength in this build, or if you used Golden Vow in this build, you're going to get a lot out of it. Golden Vow would buff the damage either way. But Exalted Flesh and Flame Grant Me Strength would benefit this build tremendously, even if it's just 90% of the damage, because it's a lot of damage. And I would highly recommend that if you take this build into New Game Plus, at some point you take some faith in order to use Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow, but we are not that far yet into New Game Plus, so it's not necessary at this point. And Ruins Greatsword, besides its insane damage, has very good guard boost, allowing you to block counter with it very effectively as long as you have decent poise, because enemies do not rebuff off your Greatsword like they do off a Great Shield, because the hardness is not the same. So you're not getting as good a opening in terms of getting that block counter off, but you can still get it off as long as you have a good window, or you have decent poise and you can just poise through the hit. And one of the reasons I use like Taker's Cameo on this build is because it allows me to do block counters with this and then just regain the health and keep topping myself off. Now, you don't have to do that, but it's kind of a nice way to do that, particularly if you're using Ritual Sword Talisman, which boosts your health at max HP. That way you can get back up to max HP. And Wave of Destruction is an absolutely devastating weapon skill. It's very expensive at 25 FP, but what it does is it lays down a wave of gravity magic in front of you in a very long distance with a decent width, allowing you to AoE into enemies and farm with it if you need, or hit into a pack of enemies. But what really is good about this is the damage is decent. It's not the highest damage Ash of War I've seen or weapon skill I've seen, but it's decent damage. It tends to interrupt enemies, knock them into the air sometimes. Like if you notice during the Crucible fight, you'll notice that they sort of flinch when I hit them with this, allowing you to get off another attack or get an opening. And also it has tremendous range, which means that you can use its kind of medium to longish windup while the enemy is still walking towards you and still hit them while you're at a safe distance. And because you can reliably interrupt enemies and kill enemies at a safe range with this weapon, it makes you really want to use this weapon skill constantly, particularly for anything that's difficult. And it just makes going through certain areas of the game a breeze, or certain bosses where you don't want to get real close to them, very, very easy. And really all it comes down to with this build, making sure that you have the correct, talismans, attributes, and also making sure that you can't be interrupted with decent poise armor. And also you have a way to manage your FP. Right? Like there's, this thing is 25 FP. If you have 100 FP, that's 4 casts before you're chugging a flask. That's a lot of FP flasks. So one of the ways you can do that is you can mitigate it with carrying Filigree Crest to reduce the cost of it, or you can increase your mind in order to have enough that it doesn't really matter to you. But you're going to have to manage your FP if you really want to use this weapon, because the Ash of War is outstanding and you're going to want to use it regularly. Now, obviously, you don't have to use the weapon skill all the time, and in fact, block counters work very well with this build, running R2 attacks, and even the weapon itself has a rather unique charged R2 where you hit down and then a little bit of gravity magic comes out of the ground. So even if you miss the enemy, they will take some damage from this, and if you do hit the enemy and that gravity magic comes out, then you do even more damage. I don't really lean into this build. Like, you could use the Axe Talisman in one of your Talisman slots if you want, but I find that I use Wave of Destruction far more than I use Charged R2. Even still, though, the Charged R2 can be very good if you're like point blank on a boss and he's doing an animation where you can get it off, instead of using Wave of Destruction point blank, because the damage is roughly the same between the two things. And if you can use a Charged R2 safely, why not use one? Armor-wise, I'm using 3 pieces of the Beast Champion set, and then I have the Great Helm for the look. Love the look of the Beast Champion armor. Would probably my favorite or one of my favorite armors from a style perspective. I love the flowing cape behind it, and the silvery look and the details on the armor. It's absolutely amazing. Can't wait to see the armors in the DLC, by the way. And it's extremely heavy, though. It has very good poison protection, but it's extremely heavy, which is why we have Greatjar's Arsenal here. And this is obviously not an armor set you're going to be using if you're playing this game early on in the game, so you're going to just get something else. If you're talking about playing this build from earlier, like from the absolute earliest you can get the Ruins Greatsword, just want to look for something with at least 51 poise. Talismans, I kind of swap back and forth depending on what I'm doing. I have Shard of Alexander here, obviously. If you're playing earlier in the game, this could be Warrior Jar Shard to boost the damage of Wave of Destruction. A Ritual Sword Talisman to further boost my damage at full health. This one you can swap out or not. If you're ranging things down regularly with Wave of Destruction, you don't tend to get hit that much. But if you lean more into the block counters and stuff like that, you will take chip damage. And you might want to swap this out for something else, like maybe the Curved Sword Talisman to increase your block counter damage. I also go back and forth between Taker's Cameo and Ancestral Spirit Horn here because these are really good. One's going to give you health back when you kill enemies. One's going to give you FP back. FP is really great for helping with FP management. Again, you could use Carrion Filigree Crest too to reduce it. I'm not using either of these here because I have plenty of Mind and I have plenty of FP flasks. But if you're talking about from the middle of the game where you're not, you know, a level 150 or something like that, you might want to have either one or both of those in there in order to reduce the cost of this weapon skill. And then obviously, as I mentioned, Greatjar's Arsenal is in there to alleviate the weight of the armor. If you're playing earlier on the game, you might need this as well. The weapon is very heavy, or something that gives you more equip weight. Anything like that is good. So attribute-wise for this build, I have 50 Vigor, 30 Mind, 35 Endurance, 80 Strength, 12 Dexterity, 16 Intelligence, 7 Faith, and 9 Arcane. Vigor is obviously there, so you need a good health pool. You can take this up as needed throughout New Game Plus. As you can see in the footage, I'm not really dying much. We have a lot of protection, so I don't really need more than that. But if you feel like you do need it, you know, feel free to get it. Mine is there to alleviate the expensive cost of Wave of Destruction. You probably don't have to take it up this high. And obviously, if you're playing this build earlier on in the game, you probably won't have nearly this high. Mine, you'll probably have like 20-something, low 20s. So you might have to have more FP flasks, and you definitely might need Carrion Filigree Crest to help you sort of offset that. Endurance is very high for this build in order to use a very heavy armor set and the Ruins Greatsword, which is a very, very heavy and still be able to medium roll. And you're just going to need a lot of endurance. Even if you use a lighter armor set, even if it just has like the bare minimum 51 poise, you're still going to have quite a bit of endurance in order to use this weapon and heavier armor. So you might not need 35 endurance exactly, but you will need a good amount of endurance. We have strength at 80 here because this weapon just scales phenomenally with strength. It has S scaling. When you two-hand it, you get that extra damage as well, which you should be. And at some point, you will take this up to 99 in order to just max it out to get most damage possible from the weapon. You know, as you're playing throughout the game, you can probably stop this around 50 or 55 earlier on in order to get, you know, more other stats. Like, you're going to probably prioritize Vigor, Mind, and Endurance and enough strength to be able to two-hand this weapon when you're playing earlier on in the game, like level 70, 80, 90. But you're not going to have enough points to just crank strength because you're going to have to get your equip load sorted out, your poise sorted out, have enough health, have enough to be able to use Wave of Destruction. So strength is probably going to be the last thing that you take up, assuming, of course, you have the requirements to two-hand the weapon. You don't need any dexterity for this build, and you only need 16 intelligence to meet the requirement for the weapon. You don't actually have to meet the requirements for intelligence if you don't want, because all that really affects is the magic damage portion of this weapon, which is low anyway. I just happened to be a class that started with 16, so it worked out fine for me. But if you don't want to put points here, you absolutely don't have to, because even the weapon skill itself deals mostly physical damage, and the weapon deals physical damage mostly, so it's not that huge of a deal. You can focus on intelligence later if you need points early on in order to, you know, get more endurance or something like that. And then if you're talking like Flask of Wondrous Physique, I have strength in here just to give me more damage when I use it. And also, I have the one that increases your charge to R2 attacks. I don't use them a ton during boss fights, but there's really not a lot of great things here. Magic damage isn't really going to benefit you much. You can put intelligence, but that's not going to benefit you much. So I got strength in there. And you know, you can basically put whatever you want. Stamina recovery is not bad, for instance. And then if you're talking which great runes are good for this build, Godric's is good early on, but because you have Vigor, Mind, Endurance, Strength, and Intelligence, it's 5 stats. But later on, I think Radon's is actually better because it gives you health, it gives you FP, and it gives you stamina. All those things are really good for this build. You don't really need any more intelligence, and once your strength's up to 80, you really don't need that much more anyway. So you're really talking about only really getting a lot of effectiveness out of maybe 3 stats with Godric's, whereas Radahn just gives you stats that are just useful in general, and you need more health, FP, stamina. All these things are good for you. So that wraps up our Warrior of Waves build. I really love this weapon. It's such a great weapon to play with. It's one of my favorite large weapons in the game. I can't believe I haven't made a build for this sooner. I can't believe I'm still making builds for this game. I still find myself playing this game constantly. And, you know, we did a poll on the YouTube channel recently. A lot of people still playing this game. And I just find that I just can't stop playing it. I'm still interested, still enjoy making builds, still love the creativity and freedom that this game has. And I cannot wait for Shadow of the Erdtree just to give us even more stuff to play around with. Stay tuned for more Elden Ring content on the channel as we graciously wait for June 21st to arrive.